Rorschach, issue 3. Tom King writing with Jorge Fornes on the art. And another crime, focused book here. And again, very focused issue here with issue 3. Dealing with, unsurprisingly, the young woman who, of course, was working
Laura.
with the Rorschach, the old man, the artist from last issue. Where it was very clear that this issue was going to be about him sort of looking into her background, and it seems to be in the form of her like journal or whatever it is that he's reading, sitting in this diner. And every so often we cut back to him sitting in the diner talking to the waitress, but he's mostly listening to this, and it's basically her telling the story of her upbringing with her father. And the story of this mine collapsing at the start of the century, which happened again just a few years later. Which I'll get to thematically what I think that's saying in a bit, but.
There's a lot of themes at this book, and this is the type of book that I feel that King's best suited for, as both of us have been on note. Like his Batman run has some really good highs, but the lows are real problematic.
And I probably said this in the last time. This is the first time I've talked to you about it. I think what's impressive about this is that I think Strange Adventures feels like very spiritual successor to Mr. Miracle. They're not doing the exact same thing, but you can definitely feel the similar vibe. They're very different, similar books between them.
The character focused on what the character's going through, even in their head.
I think Rorschach is an example that King can do a different type of 12-issue mini, that it feels and is a completely different genre and doesn't function the same way at all, but it works just as well.
But it has some of his thematic stuff in there where I feel like he's not decompressing. What's the word? He's taking something that's happening in the real world and using the frame of comics to put a spotlight on it. So in this issue, it's her upbringing and what that means, especially in the world of Watchmen and how that relates to the real world. Because I finished this morning. This is the last thing I read. I kind of saved up for it. And because I wanted to be fresh when we were talking about it. And it's low-key sad. Like when you think about the outcome, if there's a tragedy here, and when you apply that to the real world, it's doubly sad. And, I look at King, and this is the type of story I enjoy from him. There's
a few things that I think we'll talk about thematically, just to get through what the actual backstory here is that we find out about. So her father ended up maintaining, like his job was to maintain this cemetery that was built in this town in the middle of nowhere it was basically just like created because all these miners died and there was no place to put them.
So there was an explosion in 1903 and in the mine, they didn't have anywhere to bury them in this little town. It's called Hannah, right? Hannah, Wyoming. And so the federal government gave them land to build the cemetery. And so her dad, after coming back, we find out he was in the military and he was a sniper. His job was to keep the cemetery clean, right? The headstones and all this other stuff. But then you find out too that there's a lot more going on with her dad than just that he's a veteran. We
get to that as it goes on. We see that he trains his daughter at a very young age to shoot guns. She's she's hitting bottles and whatever. She's very good at it. He comments how even his first time in the field with a sniper rifle, he wasn't doing as good as she is now.
He missed his target by 10 feet. And so and then it got me wondering, well, where's mom? Right? What type of parent let's puts up beer bottles up on headstones so their preteen daughter can shoot it, and then we find out what happened with mom.
And I mean, and the context with the waitress as well is that as she's talking to him and she's like, "Oh, you work for that presidential candidate." Turley, there you go. And he's up against Redford, right? So actually, what's your opinion on this? Because this is set in the same universe as the TV show. How do you feel about that?
So wait, is it set as the TV show? Because I thought this was post the comic.
Well, it is technically post the comic, but the stuff that it's talking about ties it into the TV show.
Okay. Well, I didn't think about that. I was just thinking that this was post Doomsday Clock comic continuity in that world.
This directly references the TV show.
Shoot.
Robert Redford being president is a direct reference to the TV show.
But that was also in Doomsday Clock, if you remember.
Was it?
Yeah, it was also in Doomsday Clock when Veet is doing his plans to find Manhattan.
Okay, I can't remember what else it is, but there was other things in issue 1 that confirmed it was in the TV world.
If you guys have those, let me know, because I did enjoy that show.
I'm sure there was. I remember talking about it.
So dense that I have a lot of time. I remember the big beats and the stuff that I enjoyed on it. You know, like Jeremy Irons and
there was definitely other things in issue 1 that basically confirmed it was. On top of that, I think thematically there's stuff in this issue that also ties it into the TV show more than it does the comic book.
Well, and I'm wondering if it's a chicken or an egg thing that King maybe saw stuff in the show and goes, well, I have an idea how this would work out in the comic version. But then again, the show is a spiritual successor to the comic, so man, Manhattan.
Well, I mean, either way, it works as a sequel to the comic, but I think it's a sequel to the comic that ties into the same universe that continues with the TV show.
I guess that's one and the same, and I didn't think about that. That of course they would be, because the show's in that world too.
But it doesn't work with Doomsday Clock, I don't think. I think it definitely works with the show and not Doomsday Clock.
Okay. So, anyways, your point still stands. I get what you're saying. You're talking about the militia and stuff like that, right? With Redford as the president.
Yeah. Well, I mean, more specifically, that there's a lot of people who are upset because Redford is this what it sounds like from what I remember from the show, this very democratic president.
Very liberal, and you know, if nowadays if you're liberal, you get branded a communist, like it's 1950s again.
Yeah, anyway, so here the waitress talks about how we like this candidate here. Hannah's a very pro. So it sets up the idea that this town is very anti-Redford to begin with. So even the idea that the father and the daughter lived here, this was kind of the world they were surrounded by. So they were kind of living in this type of place. But we find out the dad, again, more the story in the flashbacks, is that the dad basically reveals to the daughter that he's got this bunker full of guns and weapons and all sorts, and that essentially he killed her mother. He killed the mother not long after the birth of her. And then he says, and this is what made me really think of the show here.
Yeah.
Is that he talks about because the squid got her, because the squid's still out there and it can still take a hold of people. Because, of course, the squid, telepathic squid, of course, is a big part of this. And the idea that he is such a conspiracy nut who is convinced that the telepathic powers of the squid is still something that can happen to people. And is affecting people.
Changed the mom, and the mom wasn't herself anymore. So because she was part of the squid now, she's the enemy. So he had to get rid of her. And so her whole training, this Laura girl, is about that, is we have to stop the spread of the squid. Right?
Yeah. And this ties into the mind stuff, because it turns out that only a few years later there was essentially another accident and it just happened again. Yeah. And his whole fear is that the squids are going to come back and there's going to be another squid and there's going to be more reasons. So we have to always prepare. We have to prep. We have to assume that the bad things are going to happen.
Militia, and he starts teasing the other guys in the militia that his daughter is better at all of this than they are, and that she's the future. But then we know that her future is she dies trying to take out Turley. Right? So, or for what looks like that she was trying to take out Turley. Yeah. I'm still not 100% on what actually happened. That was my main takeaway, that there's a lot of stuff that's very hazy on purpose that I do like, that Fornes and King are really good.
They're definitely slow teasing what's actually happening when during the so-called assassination attempt. So we'll find that out as the story goes on. I'm not concerned about that. Too much.
No. But I just want to point out. I want people to think like I'm taking everything that happened as part of the story. Yeah. Because that's what we've seen. But as he's reading the journal, we get these little snippets from the waitress, because she keeps coming back in, and it's all stuff that I've heard in real life. And you just swap out Turley for another, political person, and man, and just seeing like with the militia and the stuff they're talking about, and there's this threat of the squid, and the squid's gonna get them, and you have to stop the squid before the squid gets you. And I just look at the state of my country and seeing this as a dark reflection of it, and I don't like it.
Yeah. Also, if I recall correctly, there's a reference in the first issue, just to go back to it's tied to the show. There's a
Yeah.
reference in the first issue to where things happen in the show because I think it's set
Okay.
after the show.
Okay.
Actually,
If
not.
that's the case,
I know.
brilliant.
No, maybe it's before the show. It has to be before the show because he's facing
Well, because of what happens
Redford.
with yeah.
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 There's a reference. There was definitely a reference in the first issue.
But like they're calling Redford a communist, and like he's not one of us. And there's this whole, especially over the last 4 years, an us versus them mentality and a deep tribalism that's set in. And here you imagine this world where a space squid shows up in New York, and and what that does. And now that you bring up the show, in the show, the squid plays a big part in like the after effects and how it changes the lives of people, right? And yeah, just that there's this whole group of people that just take whatever the threat is and take it as gospel without thinking. And
because we see her training with explosives. We see her training with all sorts of things. Be able to take down men that are 3 times her size because she's still like 12. Right. And then the father's even squishing squid in her face is like the squid's coming for you. Like,
and to me, and this might piss off some people who are listening. I don't know, but he's essentially training terrorists, if you ask me.
Yeah, no, it's essentially what's happening.
These are terrorist tactics, right? Like, we have to be ready for when the government comes to get us because they're all controlled by the squid, and like it reached its breaking point when he smashes the squid in her face as like that's not normal stuff. So yeah, there's another point I was going to make too with.
Well, I think the other thing about the main stuff about it happening again is that basically the signs were all there that it was going to happen again. So he's basically, this has been used as a justification, or not so much that he's actually bringing it up per se, but thematically it's been used as a justification that this is inevitably going to happen again, and they have to preemptively do something about it. They have to fight back and do something before. And that obviously not the main stuff. The main's just an example. It's a metaphor about the squid. The idea of the squid, and yeah.
Right, that's just the scapegoat, and that's the point I wanted to get to with the mine, right? That the whole reason this town exists is because of the mine, and there's very little people there, and all the people that were working in the mine, like King writes it very graphically about what had happened in the mine, and then it happens again, but it's not because of the townsfolk and not because of their hard work. It's the people that run the mine that knew it was unsafe, and that it could catch fire again and explode again. But they still sent even more people down there, right? And then there's a whole piece about how there are people of color that worked there that weren't counted as Americans, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they weren't included in the count of the dead as Americans. They were, like with the people from Finland or Scandinavia that they're calling.
Yeah, because that's the point actually. It's after that final line where you see it emphasized again on the pages, because everything we see is just obviously in the narration boxes, but we actually see that final line because it's like it lists the people of color, it lists other people, and then at the end it says the rest were Americans, and that's the point. That's the point that motivates the character to go out and get a fresh bit of air, right? And keep in mind that this is the character who is working for this presumably Republican candidate. So so the fact that he's even having to take a moment here and go out and breathe, and it does makes us sort of think, okay, what exactly is his political views on this? Like, where does he fall in this? I know he works for this guy, but is it because he believes devoutly in this guy? Is it because
is it just a job?
Is it just a job? Did he end up here through some other way that doesn't, it isn't like his passion? It's not because he's here because.
Yeah, and what gets me here too is like the real enemy isn't the squid, right? The real enemy is to me, and reading this it's the people that said the mine was safe because that's all they care about, right? But they're using that to turn people against each other. And again, it's not just black and white, which is what we always get with Rorschach, right? There's these shades of gray that need to be at play.
Yeah, that's the whole point of Rorschach, is that Rorschach sees it in black and white when it never is.
Right. And so what does this, clearly this guy sees things like there are some things in black and white, right? Like not calling people of color, calling them non-Americans, because at that time, in the 1900s, and even later up to times where we shouldn't be saying stuff like that. That is a black and white issue where there is a right and a wrong, right? Born in America, they're Americans. And so just that idea of him reading that and having to take a break, that I just feel there's more to that character. There aren't these shades of gray, and I like that he's different than Rorschach, right? That he is capable, at least, of seeing these shades of gray.
So to move on from there, he then actually says to his daughter that, "Oh no, the squids have got me. The squid is in my mind. I think, I was going to kill myself, but I think you should do it." And he explains what the plan is. And yeah, we just get this stark shot where she shoots him in the head, and she's out of panel at this point, and she walks into panel on a 9-panel grid, sorry, the next page. And do you know what's so funny reading this digitally? Is that the 9-panel grid where she walks in and like puts the gun in his hand to make it look like suicide, and then walks out. And at the bottom of the page, we have her walking back in as an adult with Rorschach behind her. When I turned the page digitally, because it goes to another 9-panel grid, and because the top 6 panels are just the same shot again of him lying there dead, it had this weird effect going from page to page where it just felt like Rorschach faded into the shot. I don't know if this was intentional. I can't imagine it was, because obviously I imagine that most comic creators still primarily think of the physical book rather than how people are reading digitally. But there was this odd effect of like almost like the future versions of Rorschach and this woman fading into the shot, because obviously he's not still sitting there dead when they're there, because obviously she's showing this old man around this artist years later where she killed her father, or the idea is that she's told him this, and this is a visual representation of him in the same way that we're getting a visual representation of all these things happening as our characters reading the journal. He's getting this visual representation of actually seeing it play in front of him. So it's a wonderful, eerie bit of storytelling, and we see them go to the diner, and basically sit down in front of our main character. They're not literally there at the same time, of course. It's actually very much in his head, because Rorschach turns to him and says, "What do you see?"
But it very much feels like they're right there.
Yeah. And also the idea that they've left a paper trail for him, that she intentionally hid something in the book that only someone like him would find. It wasn't for her family members, it wasn't for whoever else. So it's this idea that whatever real true story is being told here, whatever event her ultimate intentions are, because when she kills her father, she seems to do it because of why he asked, and seems to be devoted to him. But I do question there's a lot of room here for some growth between her age, where she kills her father at like 14 or whatever she is, to when she goes to this old artist and they dress up in this manner. There's growth there to be told, and I'm very curious to see how we see, because last issue was him going around the apartment building and finding out about the artist. This issue it was reading the journal and finding out about her. I'm very curious what he gets to next that unveils the next part of the story, the next part of the flashbacks, the next part of the...
Someone, in my head, someone set them up. And that's the main thing. And I feel like at the end of this, because we keep... Rorschach is there, but not really, right? We're getting the vibes of Rorschach. And I just feel like by the end of this, there's going to be... Not necessarily he's going to become Rorschach, but there's going to be a clarity. So I remember when this book got announced, there was a lot of groaning from comics people, because we thought we're mining Watchmen, we're strip mining it and just let it go. But I trust King has a point of view here of what it's going to be, that nothing is really what it seems.
Well, I think I think two things. One, I mean, the character's still very disturbed and dark, because we saw what he did last issue to the couple, the man in the apartment building. So he's not squeaky clean, even if it does turn out that he's not as like villainous or didn't try to kill someone in the way that we think he did. I do think this issue is very intentionally setting you up to think of her and her upbringing in a certain way, where you're kind of judging her as someone who's been brainwashed by her father to think a certain way, to have this extremist view, But then the way it ends, where the idea that he's essentially seen a vision of them in front of him, and it's like, no, there's a breadcrumb trail to follow here that's been laid out for you. She wants you to find out more about why she did what she did and what the story is, and then to end on a series of panels, which is him closing the journal, and then the last 4 panels are the stark red of her dead body on that catwalk, above the stage, and just her lying there dead with the blood. With the hat, having left her head, it's almost like it's challenging us to go, there's maybe more to her than just what you've assumed based on what you might have read for most of this issue, this upbringing and what her father is. The idea that there's more beyond this journal to go into, there's more for him to find, that her death here, her death lying on that catwalk, might feel at first like, oh, you've stopped a terrorist from committing an act of crime, but there might actually be more to it. And
that's what I'm getting to.
Yeah.
That it's not just the end game wasn't the assassination of Turley. Almost like not necessarily her, the artist, but someone else that we've yet to see is kind of responsible for an unraveling of sorts.
Or alternatively, I mean, I don't know if there's a mastermind who's like separate from these characters. I don't know if I buy that at all yet. I don't see any indication of that. But I could buy that their intentions there were a little different than what we're maybe initially suspecting.
That could be it too.
Or alternatively, it's exactly as it appeared. And I think this, again, another point about this ending, is as we see these red panels and it's her lying there dead, the final things we hear dialogue-wise is from the waitress saying goodbye to the inspector. And she says, well, I hope you've enjoyed your time in Hannah. And you remember that if you see Turley, you tell him that from all of us, this whole small town, we're rooting for you all. I think it's very interesting that you have this character saying, oh, we all support him, and the idea that, maybe the way that people sometimes view politicians are, latch on to just like a belief or a movement. And then you have this stark reality of, no, when people get into extremism like this, it ends in moments like this, it ends in violence, it ends in these dark things. So I am, and something we've not even mentioned as we've been talking about this is that she's not trying to kill Redford here. They were trying to kill Turley. They were
Turley, right? And that's what I'm saying. There's so much more that's beyond, to me at least, as I've read these 3 issues. There's more than just the artist in her. There's a missing piece there that led to them trying to assassinate a political candidate.
It might be. I mean, maybe they'll pull the rug out from under us, and there is some squid action going on, and there's
right. That's what I'm saying. That's why I don't want to say the squid is behind it all or whatever, because I do feel like that's just a scapegoat, right? Because I do feel at the end of the day, Watchmen is still a very real world. That's why I think the TV show hit so hard. Is like, yeah, for as fantastical as it can be, it's still hit on true to life themes, especially in the last couple of years. And so here, whatever the squid represents or whatever, that's why I feel there's more going on. Almost like this is a false flag almost set up by Turley's people, right? That to make him seem more, whatever, because these extremists are trying to take him out because he's the only one that's speaking the truth, And now I sound like a nutty conspiracy dude. Over a comic book. But yeah, no, this is the Forna's art in this is just, it's not. So when I first started this one, because I got a chance to talk about it, it felt very much like a Brubaker and Phillips book. And I don't want to say a ripoff, but definitely inspired by that. But the last 2 issues, it's become its own thing. And I noticed in this one, there's a lot less darkness out of Forna, who we're used to seeing. And there's a lot of wide open panels in this one. And just this vibe where it still feels like a crime book, but not in the way of the gritty type that Brubaker and Phillips are known for. This has definitely become a King and Fornes book. There's nothing else I can really compare it to. Outside of the original Watchmen, which at its times had the big, wide open, less gritty kind of stuff. So yeah,
subtle thing here, but the detective's tie. He's not technically a detective because he's not a cop per se, but is yellow and black. I just noticed that. It's a nice little touch in the coloring. That he's got the Watchmen colors in his tie. No, there's definitely more to this, and you know what? I said this last issue, but there's actually 9 whole issues left of this, so I can't even imagine how many layers we're going to peel here.
Yeah.
And like, you know, where so you know, I can't imagine there's 9 issues worth more of the mystery, but I'm sure as he reveals more, I'm going to see where the depths are and like where we're going to go with it,
Right.
and you know why they're on that catwalk, why they're trying to assassinate, if they, indeed that is what they were doing, why they were trying to assassinate this particular person, and yeah, what else is going on? You know, maybe. You know, we are going to find out that this Turley is like up to no good and is doing something. And that doesn't necessarily mean it should be assassinated, but there was a motivation that is a bit more shades of grey than just, you know, these 2 people are psychopaths and we're trying to kill someone.
Right. I look at the and maybe just because of the sometimes I'm too dialed into political type stuff, but I'm definitely seeing the type of language that the militia people. I see that in real life online. And, you know, when you think about when this was written, this had to have been written back, in, like, early part of the year at this point?
Oh, I don't know. It depends.
Yeah, like, and so just to see a lot of this, either King's really, really good, or he picks up on things living in D.C. and his time in the CIA and stuff, you know, that have been ongoing for a while now that are just starting to reach the surface. Which I feel there's this whole section where he's the dad's training her how to fight with a knife that gave me chills because I feel like that was some CIA training that King got about. It's not a sword; it's an extension of your hand. So you just think of it as hand fighting or fist fighting, but you have a bladed weapon, and that again, that's scary, you know. So yeah, it's a really good book.
It's definitely making us think. It's prodding a lot of political ideas and it's prodding at a lot of social ideas and making us think. At the very least, this issue is very much focused on because the last issue was very much about this lonely character who, you know, I don't want to say incel necessarily, but the idea of this quiet character who had resentment and was like bubbling for years, and this issue very much was more about how one passes on their paranoia and hate to someone below them and how that kind of spreads.
Well, and also usually it's never like when you hear the term lone wolf, very rarely is it a proper lone wolf. There is a group that they find comfort in that eggs on the worst behavior. And when you think about the last 2 issues, that's very much at play. You know? Yeah. So what are we rating this one?
Yeah, I know. I'm fascinated by this book. It's always been a really good thought, and I'm glad I have someone to talk about it because Connor decided not to read it after issue 1 because he's a lame-o.
It's not even Bendis, and it's not even that. Like, it didn't take me much time to read. I went back and looked over the art. I had enough time finishing this one. But yeah. Anyways, I don't understand that boy sometimes.
No, he's an absolute madman. Yeah, what are you rating him at?
I'm gonna give this one a 9. I really like this issue.
Yeah, I am also going to give this a straight 9. No muss, no fuss.